Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Judene Pretti, the director of WatCACE, and today I'm going to be walking us through a presentation on the evolution of and next steps for the Future Ready Talent Framework within the CEE portfolio. So let's get started. My intention today is to provide a recap of the work that's been done for the development of the FRTF that many of you have been hearing about for some time. There are three main goals. One, to discuss the 12 talents in the Future Ready Talent Framework and associated example behavioral statements. Two, to begin internalizing the Future Ready Talent Framework by considering our own performance, strengths, and areas for development. Internalizing the framework is important for at least two reasons. One, so that we can begin identifying ways to support stakeholders, that is students, employers, faculties, in their interest in the framework. And two, because as Nora mentioned in the roadshows, it's important for us and the programs we support to be future-proof as well. And so we can think about this framework from the perspective of our own talents and areas for development. And the third area or goal for today is to begin to consider how the Future Ready Talent Framework can be used in the work that we do with students and employers. Note that these materials for today's webinar are on the CECA Resource Zone SharePoint site. There is a handout that I will be referring to during the presentation that will be useful for you to pull up and use as we go through. Now, before we get started, I'm not going to spend much time today on the big picture of why a Future Ready Talent Framework. Most of you will have heard Nora speak about the VUCA world and Industry 4.0 in her roadshow presentations. You also have had the chance to view Anne Fannon's webinar from June, in which she provided the context from a provincial and national level for the development of the Future Ready Talent Framework, and outlined the process we were following in its development. If you haven't seen that webinar, it is stored in the same folder as the resources for today's presentation, again on the Resource Zone UW Internal Presentations SharePoint site. I thought, though, as a warm-up for this webinar, I'd share this short video with you.
Imagine the future of work. What do you see? Do you see factories full of robots and offices teeming with AI? Do you predict that changing demographics will rewrite the rules of who works and how long? Do you anticipate the rise of a global gig economy where most people are working for themselves? All of these scenarios are emerging, but looking at them in isolation misses the point. We need to zoom out and see the big picture. Evolving technology, demographics, and power dynamics are all connected, and those connections make all the difference in the future of work. If intelligent machines can do many tasks now performed by people, what uniquely human skills will be valued? If the half-life of skills necessary for employment continues to dwindle, how can individuals, employers, and society as a whole ensure the learning modules in the education system keep up? As the global workforce gets older, younger, and more diverse, how will leaders and organizational culture have to adapt? If alternative work arrangements like short-term gigs and self-employment become more ubiquitous and mainstream, could that have profound effects on not just how we work, but where we work, how we communicate, and even how cities are designed? If augmented reality gives workers access to vast amounts of data and assistance, will workers need to become more tech-fluent for the technology to deliver on its promise? The future of work is coming. In some cases, it's already here. It's time to get to work.
Okay, so that's the big picture. Now let's turn to the more pragmatic side. Practically speaking, another way to think of the Future Ready Talent Framework is that it provides us with a common language for talents, competencies, skills that students have the opportunity to develop through their co-op and other work-integrated learning experiences. In other words, it provides us a common set of words to describe the skills and competencies that we can refer to consistently in the various work of various departments of CEE. For example, in the co-op site visit, the language could influence the conversation between students and student advisors. In WatPD and Edge, it could be displayed in course content and capstone reflections. In the Center for Career Action, appointments, workshops, PD1 and CFE are all opportunities to use this common language. In WatCACE, we can use this to organize the research that we conduct that shows the ways in which students are developing the competencies through their workplace experiences. In CEE services, it will enable to report on skill development through co-op and work integrated learning. Ultimately, the focus of this work is to improve the experience and the impact for students of the programming they encounter across the CEE departments with a unifying language to connect our work. The goal being that no matter what programming they encounter across the CEE portfolio, will all be pointing towards and using the same language with respect to competency or skill development. Not only do we think that consistency across the units will be helpful for students, but we also think that hearing and seeing this framework across the various programs and services we offer within CEE will raise students' awareness and amplify the importance of developing these skills for the future of work. However, in addition to improving the experience for students, we also think there will be additional benefits. For employers, this common language may be useful for conversations about job descriptions, allowing employers to highlight skills that are needed or the opportunity that students will have for skill development. With faculties, we will have an even richer source of data to share than just employment rates and employer ratings of student performance. We'll be able to use this common language to report on and provide evidence of how students are developing these skills during their WIL experiences. Okay, so that's why we set out to do this work. Now, what exactly did we do? You'll likely have seen many lists by top organizations within Canada and across the world that are something like the top skills needed in today's workplace. Well, we started by analyzing 19 key sources or existing competency frameworks. These resources were from UW. We included the co-op student performance evaluation, the list of EDGE competencies in the work in CCA, as well as in the national context. We looked at the University of Victoria, and as another example, the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board. And we also looked internationally, one example being the list the World Economic Forum puts out. We examined these lists for what competencies or talents were included and analyzed the overlap, and were able to identify a core set of competencies that were included in most of the frameworks. Subsequent work we've done has expanded that list of 19 original lists to now having looked at 54 different sets of competencies that are promoted as being important for current and the future workforce. From those lists of competency frameworks, we were able to identify 12 key talents. Those were the ones that were in common amongst those initial 54, but they also included competencies that are being highlighted as important for the future. Those 12 talents we identified grouped together within four themes. We then solicited behavioral statements, so examples of, for a particular talent or competency, how would you know that someone is good at it? What would that look like? Those behavioral statements were solicited from 63 stakeholders, including faculty, staff, students, and employers. We grouped and analyzed those responses, those example behaviors for each of the 12 talents, and tested those statements with CEE staff to see whether the statements fit into those categories by having you do a sorting exercise. As a side note, great appreciation for those of you who are involved in that phase of the work. The final phase of validation was with employers, and we received an overwhelming response to our request for their participation this summer. I think it might have helped that we provided a $5 Starbucks e-card as a thank you. But employers were asked to think about one most recent student they had supervised and to rate that student on the behavioral statements that we had identified associated with the Future Ready Talent Framework, as well as some performance-related questions, such as whether they would be likely to offer a student a position if they had one in the future, whether they would be likely to recommend the student, and then we asked employers about how future ready they felt the student was on a number of specific dimensions. This enabled us to isolate behavioral statements that were associated with strong performers and the importance of those behaviors for being future ready. And now let's look at the 4 themes. If you haven't opened the handout that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it's called Reflection Prompts for CEE Webinar. I'd highly recommend opening that, and I'll be referring to it as we go through the next few slides. So there are 4 main themes to the Future Ready Talent Framework. We are stating to be future ready, one needs to expand and transfer expertise, to develop self, to build relationships, and to design and deliver solutions. Within each of those 4 themes or talent areas, there are 3 specific talents or competencies that we've identified. On the next slide, we'll start looking at the talents at the behavioral statement level, but for now, let's just run through the 12 talents. Within expand and transfer expertise, those are context-specific skills, information and data literacy, technological agility. Within develop self, the talents are self-management, self-assessment, lifelong learning and career development. Within build relationships, the 3 talents are communication, collaboration, and intercultural effectiveness. And lastly, within design and deliver solutions, the 3 talents are innovation mindset, critical thinking, and implementation. Now, as we begin to internalize these and to make sense of them, let's use that reflection prompts file and have you think about a little bit more deeply about what's here. In order to do that, well, our typical use of this framework will be with students and potentially employers. For now, let's think about it in terms of our own performance. So for example, you can likely look at this set of 12 talents and zero in on the ones that you feel are strengths for you. Which ones do you feel pretty confident about? Similarly, you can probably look at this set of 12 and think about areas that you would like to develop, places where you are more challenging or things that you could work on further. You could also look at this set of 12 and think about which ones are most important for the success in your role and why. Why are those particular talents critical for being a successful, whatever your role is? And how might you use this chart to facilitate goal setting for you or for others? So as we start thinking about those questions, we can dig a little bit further into the descriptors. So within expand and transfer expertise, the 3 talents are context-specific skills, information and data literacy, and technological agility. We'll start with context-specific skills. This is the most ambiguous talent that we've included in the framework, and it's intended to be that way. There are always going to be context-specific skills that are needed in a particular role. They may relate to that role or they may relate to the organization. But the talent represents the things that you need to know or demonstrate that are specific to that context. For us in CEE, there might be some context-specific skills that involve us understanding the pedagogy of work-integrated learning, or that we have information about the programs that our students are in so that we can speak to employers about the skills they offer. Those would be examples if we were to think of what are our context-specific skills. As far as information and data literacy, examples of being effective with this talent would include the ability to identify data relevant to the work at hand, the ability to synthesize data from multiple sources into meaningful information. It's going to vary from one role to another how important that particular talent is, as is the case in all of the talents. But hopefully you can imagine and think about ways in which you, in your role, need to identify where you're going to get important information and how to make sense of multiple sources of information. The third talent, technological agility, includes being able to grasp new technologies with ease, to apply technology to achieve better results, and to advocate for the use of innovative technology. Clearly, these are things that appear to be being increasingly important as the workplace of the future evolves. Now, to consider these talents more deeply, look to the prompts in the document on the second page and ask yourself, when was a time I was particularly effective in this talent? Or what are the ways that I demonstrate this talent as part of my job? Also, for each of these three talents, you might think about how you would like to grow or expand in that particular area. The next theme is develop self and includes self-management, self-assessment, and lifelong learning and career development. Within self-management, it includes approaching workplace situations with a positive attitude, managing own reactions and emotions, coping with workplace pressures, incorporating feedback into workplace performance, and demonstrating integrity and ethics in the workplace. Within self-assessment, it includes acknowledging limits of one's own knowledge, skills, and abilities, seeking feedback on performance, and having an accurate sense of what we contribute to the organization. The third area is lifelong learning and career development, and this includes making plans to achieve learning goals, exploring how personal values and interests align with occupational demands, tasks, goals, and environments, seeking learning opportunities, both formal and informal, and taking initiative to connect with others about career opportunities. Again, looking at these three talents, you can think of the reflective prompts. Again, what are the areas within these three talents where you are particularly effective, or areas that you find come naturally to you? On the flip side, when do you struggle, or what are areas that you would like to work on? The third theme, it won't be any surprise to anyone that build relationships is a key area of importance. I think we can say that this always has been and will continue to be important. However, the ways in which these talents are demonstrated in the workplace has changed over time. For example, communication is a key talent, but the way in which someone is an effective communicator has changed and is likely to continue to change. If one thinks of the importance, for example, of social media and having a savvy about how to communicate on that platform versus another platform. Communicating ideas effectively is important. Adapting communication to audience and circumstance is an example of an effective communicator. using clear and concise language, and listening attentively to others. Again, all part of being an effective communicator. For collaboration, collaboration is working effectively with others, proactively seeking the opinions, ideas, and expertise of others, giving credit to others for their ideas, strengths, and contributions, and seeking to improve working relationships. Intercultural effectiveness. This is something sometimes referred to as CQ, or cultural intelligence. We have identified example behaviors that align with the 4 dimensions of cultural intelligence, which includes developing knowledge about values and social interaction norms of others, respecting diversity and inclusion, adjusting cultural assumptions based on experiences, and adapting to culturally diverse situations. As we did for the previous 2 themes, you could think about a time where you were particularly effective with one of these talents, or aspects of these talents that are more natural versus more challenging for you. Think about how you might like to grow or expand your talent in this area. Again, we're using ourselves and our own performance as a way to think about these elements of the Future Ready Talent Framework that we will be encouraging students to do the same. Lastly, the 4th theme is design and deliver solutions, which includes these 3 talents. An innovation mindset is someone who demonstrates curiosity in the workplace, who identifies opportunities for improvement and takes measured risks. Critical thinking allows someone to identify multiple feasible options or solutions to problems, to make evidence-based decisions and or recommendations, is someone who seeks to understand the big picture, root problem, or purpose for their actions. And critical thinking allows someone to explore the implications of proposed solutions to problems. Lastly, implementation as a challenge involves identifying concrete steps necessary to complete projects, managing deadlines, and fulfilling responsibilities. I'm sure you have the reflection part down pat now, but when you look at these 3 talents, think about which one you are particularly effective with, what has helped you develop that particular talent, and when thinking of the 3 here, how might you want to develop those talents further? As a bit of a side note, it probably won't surprise you that when we looked at the importance of these 12 talents and their connection to a successful work term, as reported by our co-op employers, these 3 talents, along with self-management, were the ones that stood out as most important from the employer's perspective. Okay, now that we've been through the 4 themes and the 12 talents within those themes, they've been finalized. So we can start working on the opportunities we see to incorporate the framework across CEE and think about our interactions with our key stakeholders. That is, we should be asking ourselves, how can the Future Ready Talent Framework enhance the interactions we have with students, with employers, with faculties, with others in the institution, and beyond our institution? How can the data that we gather through the Future Ready Talent Framework help us with each of these stakeholder groups? So I'm going to take a minute now to talk about next steps. As far as concrete next steps, there are a number of working groups you may be aware of, or you may be part of one of them, that have started work for phase 1 of this project. I won't get into the details on what's included within and not within scope and not for phase 1, but I will say that there was an exercise at the management offsite in mid-November to ensure that managers across CEE understand the scope of work for phase 1. There's one working group that's looking at the potential alignment with the language on the co-op student performance evaluation. There's one working group that's looking at how to introduce the Future Ready Talent Framework to students in PD1 and CFE as a very brief introduction before they see it again in subsequent PD courses. There's work on aligning the language in PD courses, EDGE, and CCA programming, as well as a work that's underway related to the student advisor site visit and the e-check-in form. There will be a number of other opportunities and a great deal more discussion within and across CEE teams over the coming months. In particular, when we think about our own context-specific skills, we have the opportunity to consider what types of training, tools, and resources we'll need across CEE to support us in applying the Future Ready Talent Framework in our respective areas of work. Some of the tools will be common across the teams, whereas others may be team or role specific. As an example, for the CASA team, as well as the account manager business development teams, we're planning to build on the webinar by having a face-to-face session during the December business week. The idea being that hearing this piece through the webinar gives you some time to think about how the FRTF can be incorporated into your work, and so you can bring questions that you have to the face-to-face session. Of course, the communications team is going to be hard at work to provide support across the portfolio as well as visual support. So we will want to launch this when we do with something more inspiring than a 4x4 grid that will enable us to have effective conversations with our stakeholder groups. The other areas of discussion that will continue have to do with how we can describe talents as building blocks for other talents. So you'll notice leadership isn't one of the 12 future ready talents, and yet clearly something that will be important in the future. That means that it will be good for us to talk about how you combine talents in order to build towards larger talents such as leadership. As well, we think there will be an opportunity to think about the Future Ready Talent Framework through a specific lens. For example, if we think of sustainability and the impact that will have on the future of work, I think we can think of specific behaviors associated with various talents from the talent framework that would relate to sustainability. What does sustainability look like from a communication perspective, from a collaboration perspective, from an innovative mindset perspective? So I think there will be some creative and interesting communication work to be done there. And that's all that I have. I'd be happy to answer questions now.